My bad. You were fantastic. Thank you. All right. Is this thing on? Hello? Unfortunately, it is, yeah. All right. Yeah, first of all, the slides, they looked great. Is it? No. Oh, there we go. Okay. That's it. All right. So, unfortunately, last night when I was doing this, and I had like changes in plans and all that stuff, and I'm not as young as Bobby and can stay up late and do all that. But the slides looked great last night, but this morning, obviously, they're being silly. So, who knows what just happened? So, we'll just go with it. All right, got a question for you. Do any of you guys know anyone that tells the same story over and over and over and over? Every time you talk to them, you know that person? All right. Yeah, okay. Now, Thanksgiving's coming up. Everybody's going to have them at the house, and there'll be that person there, right? Yeah, already pictures are coming to mind, right? Maybe it's that uncle, that one uncle that same story over and over. Maybe grandma, whoever. Maybe, it's like, no, I don't know anybody like that. Maybe that's you, right? Could be. Now, I'll admit this. Chances are real high, if you've been around me much, I probably told you the same stories over and over too. I will admit that I am probably that person as well, because I do it, and the kids, the youth will always like, yeah, I've heard that story before, Like, well, it's a good one, so just be quiet and listen, right? Well, in Acts chapter 26, we find an example of someone who was just like that. They told their story over and over and over and over and over. And there was a purpose behind it, okay? And they would tell it to anybody that would listen to them. And that person, of course, is Paul. All right, let's see. Is this thing... Oh, goodness. Bobby, how do you do this? Did it work? You did it. All right. Okay, now I think I've got this thing working. All right, so who knows? I had a pastor once that said his sermons were like a train. You could just uncouple them and recouple them anywhere, and sometimes you just end up with a wreck. So it's maybe this morning. Who knows? But Paul... we all know Paul. Paul was this person who loved to tell his story, which, there's good reason for that. Now, Paul was a Roman citizen, all right? He was Jewish, but he was a Roman citizen because Rome occupied the area, and because of that, he was a citizen of Rome, and that gave him certain rights that other people may not have had at the time. Now, Paul was seen as a bit of a troublemaker. He'd go places and things would happen. I mean, he caused riots in cities, like huge riots. And so he was often being arrested and taken in front of the governor and, doing all this stuff, right? And so all these things were happening, and Paul, at this point, he's like, you know what? I want to take care of one of my rights. I wanted to appeal to the Caesar. I want to go all the way to Rome. I want to go to the top. Now, did he have to do that? No, he didn't have to, but he said, I have the right to be heard by Caesar, and I want to do that, right? And so he claimed that right, and he appealed all the way to Caesar. Now, the governor of the area, it was Felix, but now Festus had taken over, he basically didn't know what else to do with him. He's like, well, now he's done it. It's probably not a good idea, but, you've claimed that right. You want to go do it. I don't know what else to do with you, right? And so he just he talked to the king of the area. Now, the king of the area I kind of see maybe as like the governor of Missouri. You had the small area, then the larger area, then all of Rome. King Agrippa was the king, and he's like, Paul here, what do we do with him? He said, I want to hear. So King Agrippa II, he's like, okay, I will hear what he has to say, because if he's appealing to Caesar, we'll just kind of check this out and find out what he did, or why he wanted to do this. So before he was sent to Rome, King Agrippa came to check it out. And so Paul, being Paul, said, "Great, fantastic. I will take advantage of my audience with King Agrippa." And he did. And this is where we're at right now. Okay? Paul is now before Agrippa in his court, and he's going to take advantage of it. So, Acts chapter 26, we're going to do 1 through 3, and then we're going to skip the actual story part, which we're familiar with. We'll talk about it, but 1 through 3, and then we're going to skip down to 24 through 32 following that. So here we go. It says, "Then Agrippa said to Paul, 'You have permission to speak for yourself.'" So, Agrippa tells him. He says, "Okay, go for it. You're on the spotlight." So Paul motioned with his hand to begin his defense. "King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today as I make my defense against all the accusations of the Jews, and especially so because you are well acquainted with all the Jewish customs and controversies. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently." At this point, and then he goes on and tells a story, about his, what he did before, and then how he became a Christian, how he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, and then what he'd been doing since then, So we're skipping over that part. It's definitely not unimportant, but we're just going to skip down after the fact. So here in 24 it says, "At this point Festus interrupted Paul's defense. 'Are you out of your mind, Paul?' He shouted, 'Your great learning is driving you insane. What is wrong with you, Paul? You're crazy.' And Paul answers him, he says, 'I am not insane, most excellent Festus.' Paul replied, 'What I am saying is true and reasonable. The king is familiar with these things, and I can speak freely to him. I am convinced that none of this has escaped his notice because it is not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe in the prophets? I know you do.' Then Agrippa said to Paul, 'Do you think that in such a short time you can persuade me to be a Christian?' Paul replied, 'Short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains.' The king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, 'This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment.' Agrippa said to Festus, 'This man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar.'" So here we have this example. He's standing before these very, very, very important and very powerful people. And Paul just starts in. He says, he shares basically his story with boldness and respect. All right? He starts off there in 1 through 3, and he says, "King Agrippa, I consider myself fortunate to stand before you today and make my defense." And then he says, "I know you're well acquainted with the Jewish customs and controversies." He starts off with respect. He starts off showing respect to the authorities. He doesn't come in and just say, "Listen here, this is my right and this is how it's going to be, whether you like it or not." He doesn't go in just some tirade after the authorities. He goes into it with respect. And he's showing respect, and he just says, "Listen, I know you know what I'm talking about. And all I'm asking you to do is listen. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to do any of this other crazy stuff. I just want you to listen to me. If you would just give me the time, and I will respect what you have, and just listen to me for just a few minutes." And he wanted the king to listen without the king and his court just putting up that instant wall of defense. Have you ever noticed that sometimes most of the time, if you go in with an attitude, or you go in like, "I am right, you're wrong," what's the first thing that happens to the other person? They shut down. They put up that wall of defense, and it's over. Because what you're saying is bouncing off that wall, and they're not listening. They're looking for problems. They're looking for errors in your message or whatever. And so it's over for them. They're done. That's not what Paul did. Paul said, I want to respect you. I want you to listen. That's his desire, to listen. He doesn't really, he's not concerned with all their, their beliefs and all their stuff like that. He's concerned with the fact that he wants them to hear what he has to say, and so that God can start working. And so that is where he's at here. And he didn't want the king to put up that defense. So he shared his life story. All right? And this is that part we've kind of skipped over, but we all know where Paul was. What did Paul start off as? He was a murderer. He was against Christians. He was against the church. He was against everything that Jesus was. And so he was going out trying to put a stop to it. And he thought he was doing right. He thought he was doing good. He's like, we're going to put a stop to all this craziness. He was a very smart man. He knew the laws. He knew all the rules. He knew everything there was to know on the Jewish side of things. But he didn't know Jesus. And so he's telling him this. He says, guys, you know where I'm at. You know what I used to be. You've seen me. Some of you definitely, my name was big. And probably some of you guys gave me the authority to go out and do this stuff. But things changed. I had this experience on the road to Damascus. The bright shining light, the voice, everything that happened there. And it was Jesus. And he said, what are you doing, Paul? You need to change. And his life changed drastically right there. And he told this story. And then he started, and since then, now you can see how things are different. Before, what happened, and then after. He told his testimony. This is something I tell youth all the time. I said, guys, you need to have this testimony. This is how this is the example the Bible tells us. We need to tell our story with boldness and respect. And so I push this with the kids myself. But that is exactly what Paul did during with that time that he had. And so after this, then they questioned him. Okay, you keeping up with me then? All right. So he was questioned for his story. It's like, now, wait a second. You're crazy. This is where that crazy comes in. So there's something wrong with you, Paul. This can't be happening. What is it? Has your education just driven you to the point of insanity? What's happening here? You guys ever met anybody like that? They're so smart, they're crazy. Yeah. And I've met a lot of, going along this idea, I've met a lot of religious leaders or professors that PhD after PhD after PhD, and they've studied and they've studied and they've studied and they've studied. And they're the ones out saying, well, after all this study, we've discovered that the Bible's not real. Stories like, I actually had this one told to me, stories like Noah and the ark. That probably didn't really happen. Jonah didn't really happen. These are just stories to teach us lessons. Even though Jesus himself referred back to him and said, when these things happened, these professors know more. And I would have discussions with them, which probably isn't the greatest thing for a college student to do, to go against their professors. But it's like, no, that's not the case. You think you know it all, but I'm just going with what the Bible tells me. The Bible says this happened, then it happened. I'm going to go with God on this one. And so, anyway, that's where they were questioning on his insanity. But you know what? Paul had an answer every time. Paul always had an answer for it. And he said, no, here is why I believe the way I believe. Here's what I've witnessed. Here's what's happened in my life. And again, he didn't get all belligerent and wild with him. He just was respectful and worked with him. And he continues in conversation with the king. He doesn't preach with him or preach at him. He meets him where he's at. And he says, King, this is what it is. He says, do you believe in the prophets? Because I know you do. Because the king did. He had all this knowledge, and he was Jewish. And he knew this stuff, and he says, do you believe in this stuff? Well, I do too. We have this common bond. But here's why I believe further. Here's what I believe more. So Paul is straightforward with the king and everyone in the court. And then he kind of comes up with this ending line that says, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains. I kind of think that might have been one of those little funny moments, It's like, I want you to be exactly in my spot right here. Well, maybe not with these, But, I could see him saying that. But he's telling them, he says, listen, everybody. And then again, this was a huge audience. There was a lot of people and important people. He was saying, this is what I have for you. I want you to get what I have already. I want you to know what I know. And he shares that with them. And so he does it, and he's straightforward with them on that. And here's the other fact. Paul could have been set free. He didn't have to do this. They all agreed. Every single one of them agreed and says, we could let him go. He didn't do anything to deserve this. He didn't do anything to be here. Yeah, he stirs up here and there, but this time especially, he's free. But he can't be now because he's appealed to Caesar. Now, do you think this is one of those moments where Paul's like, oh, I screwed that one up, didn't I? I thought I was doing something good, and then now I'm stuck here. You think that was Paul's thought? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. When King Agrippa made the statement, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar, Paul knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to do this. This is the reason he got to speak to King Agrippa. This is the reason he got to speak to that whole court. This is the reason he got to move on up. And story after story after story, as he goes up to the Caesar, his jailers and all the people and where he gets stranded and all these things that are happening, he continually tells this story over and over and over and preaching and preaching and preaching. He knew exactly what he'd have to do, what he was doing, and what he would get to do along the way. And so that was important to Paul. Very important to Paul. Now, I have a story I want to read to you I found. And kind of interesting. But it's called The Roar of the Crowd. On a balmy October afternoon in 1982, Badger Stadium in Madison, Wisconsin was packed. More than 60,000 diehard University of Wisconsin fans were watching their football team take on Michigan State University. It soon became obvious that MSU had a better team. What seemed odd, however, as the score became more lopsided, it seemed odd, however, as the score became more lopsided, where the bursts of applause and shouts of joy from the Wisconsin fans. Even though their team was being pummeled on the field by the opposing team, they were smiling and high-fiving each other as if they were winning rather than losing. How could this be? Well, it turned out that 70 miles away, the Milwaukee Brewers were beating the St. Louis Cardinals in Game 3 of the 1982 World Series. Many of the fans in the stands were listening to portable radios and responding to something other than what they saw on the field. But I have to remind you that St. Louis did win that one eventually. So they were there to watch this football game, and it was just going down. It was terrible. And yet they were cheering and they were, high-fiving, and everybody was excited, even though their team was doing terrible. But it turned out they were in a different game altogether. These guys were at a whole different game. And that's the reason they were excited and they were cheering, even though this over here was not going well. Well, it turns out Paul was definitely watching a different game than all the Roman officials. Paul was in a different game altogether with what he was doing. All right? He could have stayed quiet, and he would have been left alone. Right? Paul could have, he could have stuck to his little corner over here and just left things alone, and life would have been easy for him, right? I'm sure things would have been fine. He could have taken his time in prison and then been let go. You paid your time, now go away and just behave, right? Stop doing it, and we won't bother you anymore. Could have been the reason, or could have been the thing. There was no reason to have him request his case to be appealed to Caesar. Really, there was zero reason for him to do that, according to everybody else. But Paul's game was to change the world. The game he was playing in was God's game, and he said, I'm not going to settle for this. I want to play in this big game, and I want to change the world. And so he was looking at things totally and drastically different. He knew he'd be able to share his story over and over and over. He knew that he would be able to reach lots of people that otherwise wouldn't be able to be reached. People thought he was crazy when in all actuality, he knew exactly what he was doing. Paul, are you crazy? Not at all. Not at all. When God calls us to do something, often others think we're crazy. But they don't see the big picture. They don't have that little transistor radio hearing what's going on in the big game. They don't get that. But we do. We as Christians do. We have that in our lives. And so what we need to do is learn from Paul. We need to take his example and go with it. We need to share our story with anyone who will listen. If someone is willing to listen to you, you need to be willing to tell it. You need to share this story, and you need to do it, as Paul did, with boldness. Not timidity. Don't be all like, oh, well, But you need to say, hey, here's what God's doing for me. Here's where God is in my life. Here's what's happening. And you need to tell it with boldness. But also, you need to do it with respect. In today's world, we all know it. Respect is like they just throw it out the window. If you're not believing like me, then it's over. I don't care. I don't care what you think. I don't care anything else. It's me, me, me. Well, we, as Christians, need to do it respectfully. We know what we have is right, don't we? We know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And there's no other way to get to the Father except through him. We know this. But we have to be respectful. Or they won't listen. They won't listen. And so we have to be respectful. And we need to be prepared to answer those who question us. All right, just like the officials questioned Paul, we need to have that also. In 1 Peter 3:15 it says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for your hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Even Peter is agreeing with Paul here. He says, be ready, but do it with gentleness and respect. Be kind, loving. How are they going to know that we're followers of Christ? Our love. It's our love. And so we have to be able to do that. We need to be prepared to go with God's plan for our lives, wherever that may take us. We keep sharing Jesus the whole way, all the way along the journey. Wherever God's journey takes us, and you never know. You never know. We hear stories about it all the time, that I was going this way, and then God says, no, let's go this way now. I always think of Bobby's parents, and Brother Bobby himself. Did they, when they were younger, did they think they were going to end up in Belarus or Ukraine? I'm sure they didn't, When Bobby was born, did his parents say, okay, in so many years, in 13 years, we're going to be in Belarus? No. Did God know? Absolutely. And God prepared him for the way. And so God is going to be taking us and say, okay, now turn. And we're going to have this great and wonderful journey. We're going to have an amazing journey. And all along the way, we're going to say, hey, you know Jesus. Let me tell you about Jesus. Let me tell you what Jesus is doing in my life. Let me tell you about how I came to know Jesus. You know, and you're just telling them, and they're like, I don't want to hear that. Okay, well, but here's what it is. And then they're going to say, hey, the other day you were telling me about this. Can you tell me a little bit more? Sure, tell a little bit more. And God is in there working in their lives, and he's chipping away, and he's saying, okay, now let's do this. Now let's go here. Now let's go there. And so over and over and over, that's where we need to be. We need to be prepared wherever the journey is. And above all, I think we need to keep our eyes on the real game, the one that God has us in, and not on the distractions around us. More and more distractions every day. We're being pulled this way. We're being pulled that way. The world is telling us, oh, this is good and this is bad. Do this and don't do that. And over and over and over, we're just being hit from this side and that side with distractions. And God says, nope, keep your eyes on the game. Stay in the game that I have for you. We're going this way, and you just keep on going. And then they're going to say, well, okay, you love Jesus. That's great. I love, Muhammad. I'm following Muhammad. I'm following Buddha. I'm following these and that. And let's all just get together. We can all do this. And yet Jesus, again, no one can come to the Father except through me. Respectful, gentleness, but boldness. Boldness, just like Paul did. And if you know much about the history of the church, Paul's boldness was a big reason. That's part of the reason that we're here today. I think if we look at our family history, it'll be traveled back through Rome. Because Paul said, hey, I want to go talk to the Caesar. His game was to change the world. He did it. Our game is to change the world. And we can do it too. Because that's what God has planned for us. So this morning, as we kind of wrap things up, I want you to think on that. Where is it that God has you? What is it that God has you, what journey has God has you on? Who are the people you can be telling your story to over and over and over? In God's eyes, you need to be that person that same story, more and more and more. Because people need Jesus. We have him. We need to share him. So let's go ahead and we'll have a time of prayer. And Buena, I don't know how we're going to do this exactly, but we'll have our time of invitation. And then if you guys need anything, the altar's open. The altar is open. If you need a prayer, myself, there's others that we can pray with you. Whatever you need, go for it. All right? Just do whatever it is that God's leading you to do. All right? So let's pray, and then we'll turn it over to Buena. Heavenly Father, God, again we come to you, and we just thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the example of Paul and the things that he has given us to think about. The fact that he shared his story over and over, Lord, and that each of us also have a story with you. Help us to be bold and respectful and get out there and share our stories with others. Help us to love those around us and those that we come in contact daily, and help us to just do what it is that you have for us, Lord. Help us to see the direction that you have for us, and just the fact that you prepared us for this journey. And so this morning, if you're speaking to hearts, and I know you are, just pray that they take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. I pray that you just convict and make it known where you want us to be. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.